Recently, we had a look at some of the best 120mm fans that you can currently buy on the market and tested them for their noise and cooling performance. And long story short, it was pretty much a no contest, with Noctua coming out on top with their legendary NFA 12x25. But you guys clearly wanted to see a rematch, primarily against these fans right here, the Arctic P12. And that's mostly because they come in at a third of the price of the Noctua NFA 12s at around $10. And spoiler alert, these are very, very impressive fans. You guys were totally right to recommend these, not just because of their value, but just overall, these are a very competitively quiet fan. So we're going to use the exact same test system and setup as that initial video. Let's take a look. So consider this video a part 2 of the initial video, since we're using the exact same test system and testing conditions. To recap the testing there, we used the NZXT H510 Elite mid-tower case and measured the amount of noise that each fan was creating when mounted to the front of the case and running at different speeds. This gave us this graph right here, which is a noise versus fan speed plot for each of the fans that we tested. We found that most fans perform fairly similarly in terms of noise, up to around 750 RPM when tested in a standard room that is not an anechoic chamber. However, there is a real-world difference past 1000 RPM. At that point, you can definitely notice a difference between the Noctua NFA 12x25s and the other fans that we tested here. We then ran noise-normalized thermal tests with the fans generating the same amount of noise, cooling an overclocked 10900K, and since the Noctuas could spin a bit faster here, they offered more cooling performance. So we'll come back to these tests in just a minute, but first, let's take a look at the fans that we're adding to the list. First up, we definitely need to test the Arctic P12, and prior to seeing the absolute bombardment of comments on that initial video, I had no idea these were so popular. I guess a lot of that comes down to the value that you're getting here, as this 1800 RPM PWM model is only $10. What I find really interesting here is the fan blade design. Only 5 blades in total here, whereas the Noctua NFA 12 has 9 fan blades. We're also going to be testing the gentle Typhoons, which are developed by Nidec Servo, but were originally created by Scythe. I'm not too sure of the history behind these fans. They are a bit harder to get your hands on these days compared to the Arctics and the Noctuas, but I managed to find a couple on Amazon, and there are a few models available on Newegg as well. These are extremely similar in appearance to the Noctua NFA 12s on the surface, same fan blade count and very similar fan design, just black instead of brown. Also, Silverstone sent over their Air Blazer 120mm RGB fans, and I couldn't care much for the RGB lighting for a comparison like this, but I'm really interested to see how they compare in terms of noise and thermals. Silverstone specifically said that although the noise level readings might not be the best on the market, they do at least have a pleasing sound. So here is the noise versus fan speed plot from our initial video, showing how much noise each fan makes as it ramps up in speed. So let's go ahead and remove the majority of these fans, as we've already looked at them and we know that most of them perform pretty much the same. Now let's add in the Silverstone Air Blaster 120, and here we do get a pretty good result, slightly better than the Be Quiet Silent Wings 3 at 1250 RPM and about the same at 1500 RPM and above. Overall, not a bad fan in terms of noise. Next, the Nidec Gentle Typhoons, and here we get a very impressive result. Noise performance here is pretty much identical to the NFA 12x25s under these test conditions, which represent a real-world environment. Basically, you wouldn't be able to perceive much of a noise difference here at 1250 RPM or beyond 1750 RPM. The model that I have here doesn't go below 1100 RPM, which is a shame, but there are models out there that do go down to 500 RPM, and I'd say noise performance there would be fairly close as well. But now let's take a look at the Arctic P12s, shown in purple, and at least on the DBA versus speed plot here, they are surprisingly close to the Noctuas and even better than the Gentle Typhoons. The main differentiation point being at 1500 RPM, where the NFA 12s are slightly quieter than the P12s, 37.1 dBA versus 38.1 dBA respectively, and then 39 dBA for the Gentle Typhoons. So at least in terms of noise levels, both the Gentle Typhoons and Arctic P12s are very impressive 120mm fans, and I at least did not expect the Arctics to perform that well, just based off of how basic they look and how affordable they are. Of course, noise readings only show one side of the story, so let's take a look at a sound recording of each of them at 1250 RPM. Now the noise versus fan speed chart and even the sound recordings at 1250 RPM don't really show the full story of these fans, and as we saw in the initial video, some of these fans have fairly loud fan motors which are audible at certain RPM and PWM ranges. I did find that although the Arctic P12 and Noctua NF-A12 performed extremely closely in sound readings, they do sound a bit different. With the Noctuas, any noise that can be heard from the fan is just simply air moving, with almost zero noise coming from the fan motor itself. With the Arctic P12s though, the fan motor is fairly audible in certain PWM ranges. For example, I found right around 1000 RPM to generate this low humming noise, but then this disappeared when going slightly above or below. A lot of other fans do this too. Fans from EK and Corsair are actually a bit worse in this regard, but here's an idea of exactly what I'm talking about. So although the sound readings of the Arctic and Noctua fans are very close, I'd subjectively say at least that the Noctuas have much less motor noise and sound a bit more pleasing in comparison. That's not taking anything away from the Arctic P12s though, as these are significantly quieter than the majority of high performance fans on the market. But next up, let's take a look at the noise normalized thermals, where each pair of fans here are running at a speed that generates 40 dBA, 15 centimeters from the side panel, and so those quieter fans will be able to spin a bit faster here and offer more cooling. The top 4 fans here are very close in my opinion, all within 2 degrees C. At that point, you could either choose the one that offers the best value, that would be the Arctic P12s, or choose the one that sounds the most pleasing to you. I didn't find the Silverstone Air Blasters to deliver that much cooling performance here either, roughly equal to what you'd get with an EK Vada 120. When we lower the noise normalized threshold to just 35 dBA, we can see how these fans perform at lower speeds. We're using an overclocked 10900K on purpose here to saturate the radiator as much as we safely can, and that way we can see a larger thermal difference between these fans. The Arctic P12 tops the chart, just narrowly edging out the Noctua NF-A12x25, although at this point they are pretty much equal. In fact, I'd say that again, the top 3 fans here would deliver realistically identical cooling performance at 35 dBA and 40 dBA, unless you're wearing a lab coat and protective glasses, so make your choice based on value or sound preference. But you guys were totally right in recommending the Arctic P12, and finally that absolute bombardment of comments on that previous video can make absolute sense, and that is completely justified after looking at these results. Not just based on value, but overall, these are an incredibly quiet fan. And keep in mind that the value and performance that you get here with the Arctic P12 also extends to other Arctic products like the 120mm AIO or even the 240 or 360. So if you are currently in the market for a value focused and also performance focused quiet liquid cooler, definitely consider one of those Arctic products if you weren't already. The Gentle Typhoons are also really great fans with noise levels just mildly louder than the Noctua NF-A12s, but then with a quieter motor than the Arctics. I'd say that these are actually a great alternative to the Noctuas if you want something that's all black. Just make sure that you get the model that goes down to 500 RPM. If you are willing to spend the extra cash though, I think the NF-A12x25s are worth it as the ultimate 120mm fan, although now it is just by a slimmer margin. Since noise normalized thermals are basically identical between these, the Arctic P12s and the gentle Typhoons, it really comes down to which fan has the lowest motor noise and best sound in your opinion, and for that I would personally go for the Noctuas. So that concludes our 120mm fan testing for now, and if you're interested in picking up any of these fans to make your system a bit quieter, I will leave them linked down below. As always, a huge thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.